So after talking about the general terms of the genre and some history of it, some forms of it, let us move on to the elements, the important elements of prose fiction. Now there are basically four, yes, and you can see them on the screen. It's the plot, usually what happens, characters, who does what, who acts, yes, the narrative perspective. The other word for it is the point of view, who sees what, like who is telling and how does it tell the story? Yes. And also the last one is setting. Where and when do the events take place? I think this is very quite straightforward and quite easy to understand. The plot, if you want the definition, it is the logical interaction of the various thematic elements, the characters, the setting, and the told by a narrative perspective, thematic elements of a text which lead to a change of the original situation, the time flow, as presented at the outset of the narrative. So basically, plot is all the rest of those elements, the characters, the settings, the story, as being told by the point of view or narrative perspective, and they interact and how they change from the start to finish. The start to finish. So the linear plot, which is the most common uh, form of plot, starts with exposition. A very basic storytelling, like when you tell your friend a story, you cannot just say, for example, there was a big fight and everybody dies. No, you have to tell them who are fighting. Yeah. So you have to expose, you have to introduce uh, what happens. Introduce the events and usually they introduce the characters, and then there has to be a complication or a conflict. So this is when the problems or the focus of the story starts to develop until it reaches the highest point, which we call the climax, the crisis, or the turning point. Why? Because after the climax everything will be going down. So first there is just the introduction, and then there is the introduction of the conflict or the focus of the story, and then that problem develops until it reaches the uh, highest, what you call that, highest point, and then it goes down. That's why climax is also called the turning point. The resolution comes then until everything is finished. It reaches the final state in the end of the story, and also the other word for it, which is often used, is the denouement. These are the linear plot, and this is the basic plot. So that is the basic way of telling a story. Of course, a good writer will use these tools to the maximum effect by inventing something new and play around with it. But basically, all these elements of a plot uh, are there just so that the storytelling can be understood. If you're missing, for example, the exposition, you don't introduce any of the characters in any way, uh, nobody knows what happens. You use 800 characters, they are all interacting, and you don't tell the readers their names. Yeah, nobody will follow that story. Or you tell a story that nothing happens. That the readers cannot identify where is the complication, where is the climax, where is the resolution. You don't tell a story, you just describe uh, you just describe something. You don't tell a story. A story has to have a start and finish. Of course, people find many ways to tell about the exposition. For example, you don't have to introduce each of them. You can introduce the characters through their actions, which is very popular right now. Which with the films, with today's films and novels, they don't try to explain who is this character and what does he do, what does he think about ABCD, but they just put things in action. So they may have do it differently, but they still do it. And two of the most important invention that people are always coming back to are the flashback. So this is not linear. Linear is going one way, from exposition, complication, climax, resolution, that. But the flashback might take you back. For example, a lot of the modern television series and films do this, in that they do the exposition later. They start with the climax, everyone is dead. What are you going to do? And then people remember back, okay, 10 years ago, something like that. That is flashback. So it's flashing back to a certain part of the to the past. Foreshadowing is like telling you a clue that something is going to happen. So something like this. The exposition starts with a complication that a character introduces himself that I don't like children very much. For example, there's this fine detail in the beginning that will reveal the climax and also the resolution of what coming next. That is the foreshadowing, a clue that will tell you what will happen next. Of course, this clue may or may not be very clear. As an example, yeah, a character makes a brief remark, a passing remark, a seemingly unimportant remark that he hates children, and then suddenly in uh, the protagonist's children were missing. So you get the clue that okay, that character that says he hates children, that might be the person who kidnaps those children, who for example murder their children because he makes that remark. So that is a foreshadowing, a clue to help the readers or the viewers to guess what will happen. It usually is in the horror movies, thriller, actions. I think they put a lot of foreshadowing of what to come. Yes, and also the next element is characters. There are two kinds of characters. The flat character, which is the typified character, versus the round character, which is individualized character. Now, a more early examples of novels will usually use a typified character or a flat character simply because it is more of the norm at the time to have a very defined character. If he is evil, then he is 100% evil. There is no good in him. It makes for a very simplified storytelling, and it has a very what you call that, very immediate satisfaction. While the round character is not 100% in anything. This is more to the realistic or individual character we see in the real world, the round character. Example would be uh, a person who likes a murderer, yeah, who likes to kill, but he also has a soft spot and he also cares about his children. So you cannot say that he's actually a very bad person. There are always some good inside a bad person, and vice versa. In the opposite, you have a good people, who has done a lot of good, but he also has a weakness, like he's easy to be fooled, or he can be a nasty person. So this is a more round character. It has many what you call that, many aspects to his personality, and more like a real individual. While the flat character usually has one one great personality, one overwhelming personality that it does not deviate, it does not change from. If that person is evil, then he's 100% or 90% evil. If that person is good, then he's always good. He cannot do bad. This is more typified characters. Um, uh, we don't really say whether the flat or round characters, which one is the better. Although round characters uh, usually is the better, but in general, round characters are the better characters. But depending on the context, flat characters are also important. For example, in minor characters, you want to develop flat characters because you want to keep the focus on the main character. And also, flat characters can give you a very good satisfaction from the story. A very good example of a modern flat characters would be those superheroes uh, movies. You know, those superheroes are always good people, and they always try to be good. There is not a there is nothing wrong with their intention. Although the more recent superhero movies uh, in the year 2000s and the late 90s, starting from those eras, starting with Batman actually, Batman in the 1980s, the that that Batman has the what you call that has more nuance, has more aspects to him than just being good. He's also very sad. He is also very dark. You see, and he has to prove that he's as a good person. But generally, superhero characters, in a way, yes, are more flat than the characters you would have in the drama movies in those really good Korean what you call that Korean series and stuff like that. Uh, they have those people in those characters in the drama movies. They're more round. They're more well built. So if that person is a bad person, is the antagonist, but he still have some aspects of him that is being good. Usually you found that in the drama movies. Our Cinetron actually likes flat characters. The fact that it is very popular will tell you that uh, a lot of people enjoy this Cinetron. And because it's, you don't have to think too much. And for some people, it's good. You know, cheap entertainment, direct entertainment, they're enjoyed by millions. While very deep and round characters, not everyone might understand that. And there's also modes of presentation of these characters. You know, explanatory, which is through a narration, or dramatic, which is through action. So explanatory, usually you find long paragraphs in a novel that describes a person. Character A is a very good person. He works in a hospital. He works as a nurse, and he always cares about his patient. Now, if you find that kind of description, it is explanatory, it's a narration. In a modern time like this, in a more modern novels, this is not good. Well, the more exposition, yeah, explanatory is exposition, is not considered very good. Just like you see in the Cinetron, there is this voice from the heart. They will tell you what is the motive of a character, what is the he's going to gain, and what are his difficulties. A much better or much efficient modes of presentation will be dramatic. If it is a novel, it goes through a dialogue. So instead of telling that this person works in a hospital, a nurse, etc., it was just this person talks to his patient. And from the way he's talking to his patient, you know that he works there, that he cares for his patient. Very simple, very direct, very active, you know, very action oriented. An example given in the book is Ernest Hemingway. And if you're not prepared, if you are not prepared to read Ernest Hemingway, he's very efficient with his words, so sometimes it's easy to miss. But his way of presentation is very efficient, and that's what we in the literary criticism. This is the better one, the more dramatic and the action-oriented. This is an example of from Mark Twain. Yeah. It is very explanatory, and the character is flat. It was summertime and twilight. We were sitting on the porch of the farmhouse on the summit of the hill, and Aunt Rachel was sitting respectfully below our level. So it does not show you how Aunt Rachel was sitting respectfully. It just tells you directly that Aunt Rachel was sitting respectfully below our level on the steps, for she was our servant and colored. She was a mighty frame and stature, 60 years old, eyes undimmed, strength unabated. You're just being told about this. It can be boring. Yes. This is a Mark Twain is an early example of American novel. She was cheerful, hearty soul, no more trouble for her to laugh than it is for a bird to sing. I say Aunt Rachel, how is it that you lived 60 years and never had any trouble? So you see, there's a lot of description here, and you don't really see how the Aunt Rachel is cheerful or heart is solely just being told so. Compare this to what how efficient and how short Ernest Hemingway would reveal about his character. "We have lime juice or lemon squash?" Macomber asked. "I'll have a gimlet," Robert Wilson told him. "I'll have a gimlet too. I need something," Macomber's wife said. "I suppose it's the thing to do," Macomber agreed. "Tell him to make 3 gimlets." Now, in this interaction, you can, if you really know about what these guys are talking about, the background, the story, it makes you think what kind of person is like that. The word, for example, from Macomber's wife, "I need something." It is a bit of a foreshadowing. Tells you a clue uh, about what will happen later. Is there a problem with with the Macomber's wife that I need something? I need a. He wants. Maybe she wants to forget something, and you know that I'll have a gimlet. Very direct. What you call the answer. While Macomber seems to just agree on things. So it tells you the dynamics of this relationship without telling you what kind of person Macomber or Robert Wilson or the wife is, and tell him to make 3 gimlet. Who says that? Is it Macomber? Is it Robert Wilson? Is it the wife? What is the uh, uh, what is the influence if one of them says that? So it this kind of text makes you think. This kind of uh, text give you enough sign, enough clues to think for himself, without just being told that, for example, Macomber's wife is 60 years old, her eyes undimmed, her strength unabated. She was cheerful. She looks like a bit serious, probably, yeah, and that's not really about need something, shows that she has some kind of problems. Macomber seems to have a problem, like he's not a very strong character, probably, because I suppose it's the thing to do, and he still asks about things to do. Maybe he's a caring person. So you want to learn more about this dialogue because it gives you enough signs, enough clues that you're more involved in the story rather than just being told. You're told uh, rather than just being told. You try to learn, so that is more involving, and that is makes more enjoyable learning. And the last is uh, the next is the point of view. The omniscient is the third person point of view. So uh, this is an example of the third person. No, sorry. The third person point of view says something like Annie walks through the door, Annie reads the comic book, Annie then fell asleep. Something like that. The third person. So you're looking down on this character. You're outside of this character. The first person narration is directly like instead of Annie enters the room, it will say I enter the room. So you see from the eyes of the characters there, I entered the room, I read some comics, I fell asleep. So there's more direct relationship and a more closer relationship, which the choice of this has a lot to do with what kind of story the author is trying to tell and what kind of effects that the author is trying to get. A third person omniscient point of view gives you distance. Maybe the author wants you to be more objective. Maybe the author wants to tell of a long story and you don't need to be very close to this character. That's why he is using the third person point of view. If you use the first person narrator, maybe the author wants you to be the character, wants you to empathize or to be more emotionally connected to that person, to that protagonist or minor character. But the last type of point of view is the figural narrative. It tells about the situation from the figures acting in the text. It's a bit hard to to understand without an example, the less form, yeah, the figural narrative situation. Fellows had seen him running. They closed round him in a ring, pushing one against another to hear. So this two sentences. The first two sentences is third person, yeah. But when you get to the next part, you tell us, what did he say? It's almost first person. It's like you're being brought to the people who are there, saying, tell us, what did he say? And then the next part, he told them what he had said, and what the rector had said. Rector is not the rector of the university. Rector is the head of a religious organization, usually a monastery. When he had told them, all the fellows flung their caps spinning to the air and cried, "Hurrah!" or "Hooray!" or "Oorah!" if you're more uh, Eastern European. The cheers died in a soft grey air. He was alone. He was happy and free. So it kind of changes. It tries not to be in the first person and the third person, more like an artful or a creative uh, combinations of both. So there are two, you know, innovation to this kind of point of view in writing. The stream of consciousness and the changing narrative. Now we'll look at the stream of consciousness technique in a bit. Yeah, we'll give you an example of that. Basically, like it tells the story like the way a person is thinking. So it goes from one topic to another. Doesn't have to be a very structured, a very focused, but it works like the way you think. You never think of one thing only. You think about a lot of things at the same time. This is a stream of consciousness technique. We will talk about it in a bit. The changing narrative uses, instead of a combination like this one, at the same time, the changing narrative uses the first person point of view for a while and then changes into third person in the next chapter. The next chapter for our next character, for example, change back to the first person. So those are the two main points of view, the most traditional and the most widely used, the first person and the third person perspective point of view. How about the second person? The second person is not usually used in a fiction. The second person point of view is the kind of thing that directly talks to you. Example, announcements or directions how to avoid COVID-19. Do not smoke, wear a mask, something like that. So the piece of uh, that writing directly talks to you. That's the second person perspective. It's not usually used in prose fiction. Now, the last is the setting. The setting denotes the location, historical period, and social surroundings in which the action of a text develops. It is the choice of the author as a way to do or improve the storytelling. If you want to tell a horror story, you start with something like this one. It was a dark night. It was a heavy rain. It was a storm. That's how you tell a horror story. If you tell a horror story, something like the sun was shining, the flower were singing, children were laughing everywhere. Well, you do not get to tell a horror story because nobody will feel the fear. Yes, so you choose the type of setting. The author chooses the type of setting to describe, and it's always focused, at least in a good prose fiction, that it is always focused so that the reader will directly understand what is the author is trying to tell about. The same goes like in a movie. If you are observant enough, there are almost no color available in horror movies. While if you talk about romance or comedy, the color are very bright and very colorful because they want to tell. In a horror story, they want to make you afraid, depressed. That's why they remove most of the color from the screen. But if you want to talk about drama, that is to say, romantic stories or comedies, they want to make you happy and more emotional. Yes? So this is a good example of a horror description. of Poe, Fall of the House of Usher. The simple landscape features, I know not how it was, but it was first glimpse of a building. So the building, you cannot really see it. It's covered, full of mystery. He does not start with a complete description of a building, he just a glimpse of a building. And then a sense of insufferable gloom, a sense of uh, unbearable, insufferable is unbearable, gloom, darkness pervaded my spirit. I looked upon the scene before me, upon the mere house and its simple landscape features of the domain, upon the bleak walls. You have gloom, you have bleak. See, almost no color. It's just ugly and terrible. Upon the vacant, empty. Yes, eye like windows. So the windows are like eyes, and they're empty. When you look at empty eyes, maybe a dull eyes all just white. What kind of feeling do you have? Of course, horror. So Poe is doing of a very good job of this by describing things as a very bad looking, terrible, harsh, no, no, scary. Yeah. Upon a few rank is smelly in a very sharp way. Sedges, rank sedges. Those are plant sedges. And upon a few white trunks of decayed trees. Now you look at the wood. A wood, if it is living, it is almost green. Yeah, white green something. When you cut a small branch, you see there's a green circle inside it. If it is dried up, or it is an old plant, old enough trees, you see it's brown. But how about white? What is this dead? Ghostly. So this is the example of a good setting building by Poe of a horror setting that we talk about a while. As you go forward, he develops this kind of mystery and horror to a degree that the readers can actually feel like they are in the story. You see that the perspective here is I know not how it was. It uses a first person uh, point of view to bring the readers into the story directly. It does not use a third person. It uses a first person. So you actually look upon those ghostly trees, look upon that bleak walls, look upon those vacant eye-like windows. So it's more powerful that way. Now the next example will be a piece by Virginia Woolf. This is the more modern kind of text. Yeah, Poe is quite traditional, but Woolf is quite modern. By modern, we think of the years 1900s to 1920s. Yes, these are the modern part in the literature. Mrs. Dalloway said she would even buy the flower herself for having lived in Westminster. How many years ago? Over 20. One feels that even in the midst of the traffic or walking at night, Clarissa is positive. So there's no focus. It just go on, go on, go on, go on. And suddenly in the middle there out it boomed. First a warning, musical. So it talks about it in a very quick paced and very multi focus. For a wolf, this is you like this because people are getting bored of pose and long descriptions of things. You might consider, for example, that the more modern films does not try to describe too much, but just go with the action, focus on the action. Wolf is trying to portray this with a writing that most closely mimic or most closely try to uh, copy how a mind works instead of how speech works. He doesn't care about, for example, the rule that when you say in the first sentence here, Mrs. Dalloway said, you should have Mrs. Dalloway said, comma, and double apostrophe like you would write a dialogue. No, he just no, she just say things like it comes to her mind, and she was talking about Mrs. Dalloway at first, and then jump to Clarissa, and then jump to Big Ben, and jump to the boom in the sky, and then the Victoria Street. So it jumps a lot, and we found a refreshing way of pacing, a fast pacing, and very you can be just in the moment, like you're in a stream, in a river, where you just float and enjoy the scene. Wolf's way of writing can give you that sense of floating in the events and just take everything in and not thinking too much about A, B, C, D, about every aspect. Like, for example, in the Ernest Hemingway, you start to think about a lot of stuff that happening uh, in the background, but with Wolf, you're expected to just float in the stream of consciousness and just enjoy. So there is a different kind of enjoyment that you can get from it, and this is just the introduction of what you can get from the prose fiction. I hope that explanation works, although it is a very long explanation. I'm sorry for that. And we will move on to the poetry next time. And for now, I think that's all for my explanation. Thank you and goodbye.